Hello YouTube, I'm David with the David West channel. Well, today I wanted to talk to you about the right size spindle for bow drill. You do not ever want to have a really thick diameter spindle because it causes you more work. This was a lesson that was hard for me to learn at the beginning. I liked a big fat spindle and a thick fireboard because I like the idea of getting like 10 embers out of one divot. But it is so much harder on you physically when you're trying to drive a spindle that big. I was thinking about the best way to try to explain the pressures and the difficulties and the forces being applied with a big fat spindle, and I think the best place to start is with the amount of downward pressure that you have to put on your spindle. Now here's the big fat one that we made in the Hatchet-Made bow drill set, and so that's why this one is so fat. Let's use it. So let's talk about downward pressure. And of course you would drive it right here. When everything's working just fine, your natural bearing block is good and lubed, like this has Fatwood, and your spindle is nice and pointy, and the spindle's not worn down, and you have a small tip, it only takes a certain amount of pressure, downward pressure, on the bearing block to hold everything together. But if you use a big fat spindle like this one as opposed to this one, you can just imagine how much extra pressure you would have to apply to get a diameter that fat to bore down into a fireboard. So the bigger that the diameter is, the harder that you have to press down on the bearing block. The harder that you have to press down on the bearing block, the harder it is to drive that spindle. Also, the harder that you bear down on the bearing block, you're wearing the point off of the top of your spindle. So like on this one, when that point wears off and shoulders out against the bearing block, that's adding more and more difficulty. Once that shoulders out, you're having to press down even harder to hold it all together. The harder that it is to drive this spindle, the harder you have to press down on the bearing block to keep everything together. Don't start that downward spiral. Don't get to where you're having to press down so hard that you wear the point off of here and your bearing block shoulders out. Start with a small diameter spindle. It is not going to take as much pressure. Surely you could see it's not going to take as much pressure to make this bore down into a fireboard as this big fat one right here. So I don't know if I got you to understand that, but there's so many people online that's having trouble getting a bow drill friction fire, and all they would need to do is to drop down I mean, they use bigger spindles than this. They use 1 inch and bigger than 1 inch spindles, when all they'd have to do is drop down to a small size and they could easily knock out bow drill friction fire embers. So this is the set that I made on the Hatchet-Made bow drill set, and I've been itching to get a hold of it with my Mora and cut everything down to the right thickness of fireboard and the right diameter on the spindle. So that's all we're going to do today. If you want to see the struggles that I had with such a fat spindle and such a fat fireboard, you can go back to this video right here. That's the link where I made this, and let's shape everything up and see how easy it can be with a natural bearing block. Alright, if you've been to my channel very often, you know that I like to go to square. 4 square sides, and then take and round that up. This beech is very hard, but the stainless mower is doing a good job with it. So let me take them corners off, make sure that my center line is right all the way down from the center of the tip to the center of that tip, and I'll turn you back on. We'll try it out. Oh, and I am going to thin down the fireboard too. I did not get it as small as these two. That's an American beech, and this is shortleaf pine. But I got it way smaller than what it was. And we'll go ahead and use the other side of that Fatwood bearing block. And I came way down on the thickness of the fireboard. You don't want your fireboard any thicker than your spindle. So let's set up on the ground and go ahead and do a burn in. I usually do about a 60 to 100 strokes for the burn in. I call a stroke a forward and a return. Fatwood's doing its thing. That's melted fatwood right there. Beech, it is so hard. You wouldn't believe how hard this wood is. Let's give it a try. If you want good alignment on your spindle, if you want it to be straight up and down, the shorter the spindle is, the more it needs to be in the small of the foot. Now if this was 12 inches like I like it from here out, then I could put my fireboard further out on the balls of my foot. Now, it's normal to get an ember in 60 to 100 strokes. Let's see what we can do with it. And the spindle tip did not shoulder out. Look at all the fatwood we melted out of it. about that beech? Did a good job, didn't it? Yeah, we got a huge ember. So if you struggle with bow drill and only rarely can get it to work to make an ember, consider going down on the diameter on your spindle. You're working much harder than you really need to. So I appreciate y'all joining me on this one. We'll catch you on the next one.